Buckle up, team! Today, we're going to be making some more bones. The most important bones, in fact, because of how big of a role they play in the 3D forms of the body. Talking, of course, about the rib cage and the pelvis. And it's really important that you get these two things right, or otherwise, all your other muscle groups are going to look weird. And your character is probably going to look like a deflated whoopee cushion. And you don't want that. Do you want that? You don't want that. So if you want to make it your goal to master any one thing during this semester, make it these two structures that I'm going to introduce you to today. Because as long as you get the rib cage and the pelvis right, even if you screw up some details on the muscle groups, it'll still probably look all right. Now, the other way around, not so much. So pay close attention. Now, before we actually get into sculpting these structures, let's get some clay wrapped around our wireframe first. Just get your hands and your clay warmed up. Let's get into it. Woo-hoo! Look who it is. It's the subframe. Guys, remember that from our last video? If you don't, go watch it again. Now, this thing is just itching to get some clay, so let's make it happy. Let's get it on there. So for the most part, we're going to be rolling up these little sausages of clay. I guess I call them sausages for some reason. You can call them worms, you can call them rolls, or whatever sort of cylindrical shape suits you. And then we're going to press them firmly onto our wireframe. The reason why we do small pieces at a time is because if you just try and throw on a big blob, you're going to lose where all your joints are, and then all that careful measurement we did, it's going to be for nothing. Now when we get to the leg, take a close look at how my fingers are moving as I apply the clay. You want to squeeze and turn as you gradually pull the clay down the length of that wire. If you put on a little bit too much, you can always just pull off a little bit of that excess. You're going to do the exact same thing for the arms, and BAM! Now we're ready for some real sculpting. Okay, now that was the easy part. Now let's get into our first bony structure today, the pelvis. The old baby basket, the source of a lot of questionable dance moves, which I've wisely decided not to demonstrate for you today. So our pelvis is going to roughly resemble the shape of a basket, but the thing that I want you to pay close attention to is the angle at which it tilts forward. We're also going to use three key areas to define its shape: the wide point, the high point, and the ASIS, otherwise known as the anterior superior iliac spine. Ooh, now that's some potent anatomy talk. But enough of that, let's actually thrust this thing into motion. Okay, what do we got here? Let's pull up that template. The first thing that I want you to make a note of is where this thing sits in relation to your wireframe. You'll notice that the majority of the volume is above the line of the hips that we have in our frame. Why? Because the wire actually lines up with the trochanter of the femur, which is going to be an important landmark later on. Okay, now I know the pelvis seems like a complex shape at first, but it's going to be a lot easier to work with once we got the basic shape down. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, as I'm doing this, as I'm putting the clay on piece by piece, I'm thinking about establishing the width and the depth of this form. You can think about it like putting an imaginary box around your shape, so that you have a clear border to stay inside. I'm also staying conscious of keeping that slight tilt. At first, I think you'll find it a lot easier working with small pieces of clay and gradually building your shape up. It's going to give you a lot more control than putting on a big piece and then trying to get that into the right shape. But as you start to build up more of that confidence, you can start getting a lot more bold with your strokes. Okay, there we go. This is a good starting point. Now, let's jump back to our template and take a closer look. As I mentioned before, there's going to be 3 key points that we're going to use to define this shape. The ASIS, the wide point, and the high point. Okay, now watch this. We're going to work a little magic using our template and our trusty calipers. I gave these templates to you for a reason. You can set your calipers to the width of the pelvis on the template and then translate it directly onto your sculpture. Oh my goodness, that's incredible! So now when we check it, you can see it's still got quite a bit of room on the sides there. So let's build that out a little bit. Okay, there we go. Now we have a nice tight fit. You'll really want to study the front and profile views of the pelvis to get a better grasp of exactly where these points fall and the planes that are created between them. Okay, now we can take our measurement for the ASIS. And then use the tip of our caliper to mark it on the sculpture. Okay, great. Now we're gonna roll up a delicious little mini sausage. Don't eat it. We're gonna use it to establish our ASIS. And then we're gonna start putting on little chunks of clay and building up that front plane with its downward angle. Pay attention to how the light falls on your shape. Right now, we can see a very clear difference between our top plane and our front plane just by the level of shadow that falls on them. This is why it's very important to be sculpting in a well-lit area. You need to be able to see your shadows clearly. Okay, see that? I'm using those little sausages and I'm laying it across the ASIS and then creating a bend in it. This gives me a corner that marks the spot and also defines the angles of the planes surrounding it. In this case, the top plane and the front plane. Okay, so we have our ASIS and our wide point. All that's missing is the high point. Now, we know roughly where this is supposed to go, and it seems like we might be lacking a little bit of clay, so I'm just gonna build it up a little bit, and then we can measure. Same concept for measuring, only this time I'm going to be taking the height. And okay, looks like we weren't lacking as much height as I thought, so we'll just trim a little bit off with our loop tool. And there we go! We have our correct height now. We have our ASIS, our wide point, and the high point in the back. But I'm not satisfied with this top plane right now, so we'll just use our loop tool and make it a little bit more clear. If you want, you can exaggerate the planes between these points if it helps make them a bit more obvious for you and solidifies your understanding of their relationships. Okay, there we go. We have our ASIS, our wide point, and our high point. This is going to make a solid pelvis for us to hang our muscle groups off of in the future. Woo! Great job, people. Now it is going to take a little bit of practice to get some of these things right, but once you get that nailed down, the rest of the muscle groups just pretty much put themselves on. Okay, that's not quite true. But these landmarks are going to help serve you as a very helpful guide. Okay, now let's jump up top to the rib cage. And this is the one that people always forget about. A lot of beginners make this area way too flat because they just go straight to sculpting the muscles and they forget to build up the roundness of that rib cage first. So don't make it flat. Give it some volume. Give it some room. Y'all got a heart in there. What's going to happen once you start filling it up with love? Where's it going to go? Wait, you tell me you don't love people? That you're a mean person? Even if you are a mean person, you still got to fill it up with something. Hate or sadness or sour milk. Ugh. Gross. Okay, the point is, we got to pay attention to the roundness and fullness of that rib cage if we want our characters to feel like they're full of life. That is certainly true. So, how are we going to do that? Let's grab our template and take a closer look at the rib cage. Once again, the thing that I want you to pay attention to is the tilt in the profile view, especially how it relates to the tilt of the pelvis. If it helps, you can draw a box around each of them just to see this relationship a little more clearly. Notice also from the front view how the width of the pelvis relates to the width of the rib cage. In the male figure, they're almost the same. But for the female, the rib cage is going to be a lot narrower. Okay, let's start this off by getting our basic shape on there just like we did for the pelvis. Once again, I'm thinking primarily about the boundaries, the length, the width, the depth, and also the tilt. At this point, you just want to get each of these boundaries loosely blocked in, and then we can refine them later if we need to. You can do each of these things one at a time. You can see I started by establishing the rough curvature of the front and the back, and now I'm trying to widen this mass. By thinking about the contours, we define our boundaries. And then it's super easy to just go in and fill out these spaces in between. It's like connecting the contours. Ooh, there you go. That alliteration too. Connect the contours, people. That's what we gotta do. Now I want you to pay attention to how my thumb moves across the surface as I apply the clay. It's moving in the arc of the curvature that I'm trying to create. Seems like a pretty straightforward concept, but it makes a big difference compared to if you were to just dab on little pieces. Okay, that's a good start for our rib cage. Now, let's jump back to our template and check one very important detail. How much space is there between the pelvis and the rib cage? Well, it just so happens it's probably not as much as you think. But we'll use our calipers to measure, and then we'll check it out on the sculpture. And here, you're measuring from the high point of the pelvis to the bottom of the rib cage. We're almost there. We'll just trim a tiny little bit off with our loop tool. Now we have the right space in between. So let's go ahead and also check the length of our rib cage to see if we're on the right track. Remember, its tip goes past the collarbone, so you should build it up a little bit past the shoulder line of your wireframe. There we go. Now our length is looking better. Now what? Well, we might as well check the width too. And yep, we're pretty much good for the width. And our calipers scraped off any little bit of excess that we might have had there. Okay, now we can start to finesse this thing a little bit. Now, just like I did with my ASIS before, I'm going to use these delicious little clay sausages, don't eat them, to clarify the curvature of my planes. Especially in this area of the rib cage, which is known as the thoracic arch. The ribs below this point start to create more of a downward plane. We want to make sure that we capture that. Then we're going to fill in the areas in between. And look how I'm building up that roundness, okay? I would rather you exaggerate this a bit than make it too flat. Remember, we don't want our characters looking like a deflated whoopee cushion. Alright, looking good. Now on the back side of the rib cage, there's this little groove that the spine fits into. So grab your smaller loop tool, and we're going to use the wooden end to carve it in. You draw a line first to help guide you. Then you're going to take that wooden end and you're going to press and just dig that clay out. Very nice. Great work, people. Finally, we're just going to jump back to that thoracic arch and define it a little bit more clearly. Beautiful. Look at that. Remember to check your tilts too and fix them if you need to, but this is looking great, guys. And it's going to make a fantastic foundation for your sculpture. Alright, good work, good work, good work. Now remember to keep practicing that until you're thinking about rib cages and pelvises in your sleep. Now on to a little bonus section, and to one of my favorite and probably one of the most perplexing areas of the human body, the shoulder girdle. Composed of the clavicles and the scapulae, this is one of the most highly mobile areas of the human body. We tend to forget just how much of an impact it has on our arm movement. In fact, you can't actually raise your arm up more than 90 degrees without having some scapular shifting upwards. This is one of the things that you guys are going to be looking at for part of your muscle groups assignment. But for the time being, let's just check out how to block in a simplified version of the shoulder girdle. Alright, let's see what all this girdly business is about. First things first, I want you to look at where the shoulder line is on your wireframe and notice that the clavicle is actually above it. This is because on the wireframe, our shoulder actually lines up with the shoulder joint. Now, I know the wire resembles the clavicles, but it's not, okay? And we can design our wireframe so that it would be the clavicles, but it's just a lot easier to do it in clay. Now, even the sauciest of clay sausages isn't going to cut it for this one. We're going to need to do a full roll. So roll it just like you're rolling dough until you get this nice thin cylinder. I guess you could call it a pipe or a rod too. There's really so many better things you could call it than a sausage. Maybe I'm just thinking of barbecue too much. Okay, just as if we were drawing a line, we're going to put it in the place of our clavicle. I guess we're placing a line. And then you can tear off any excess length once it reaches the shoulder joint. Then go ahead and do that on the other side too. Beautiful. Now take the flat end of the small loop and just blend it onto the rib cage so that we get a firm connection. Great. If we take a look from the top, you can see that the clavicle forms that famous Cupid's bow shape, if you've heard that expression before. You can adjust it a little bit if you need to. I'm just going to soften this one up a little bit, get it blended in more. Now, it's on to the back side. It's time for the scapula. We're going to make it look spectacular. Woo-hoo! It's a hot rhyme. Joe, don't burn yourself. Okay, remember to keep the curvature of that rib cage in mind, and also remember that the arm joint is located on the scapula, so those forms need to connect. So we're gonna need a piece of clay in a roughly triangular shape. And nope, that's too big. Quick tip, if you need a smaller piece of clay, you can always divide a piece into two by grabbing it in between your thumbs and your index fingers. And you're gonna press it tightly and then pull apart. That should give you roughly 2 equal halves. Now make a triangle with the smaller piece, and yeah, that's a lot better. Press it down and shape it against that rib cage. And then go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. This is where that other split piece comes in handy. That's a good start, but they're still looking a little bit bulky, so we're gonna use our loop tool and just shave them down a bit. Now, I don't have a reference on hand. I know, shame on me. Shame! But I recommend that you check one out because the scapula, she's a little bit tricky. One thing we do know for sure though, is that the two of them are about a head's width apart. So let's measure that out. We'll use our trusty caliper. And yeah, hey, we almost got it. We'll just trim a tiny bit more off. There, that's a lot better. Finally, I'm just gonna fill in some of these gaps so we know that these features are properly secured to the sculpture. Also, if you check your reference, you'll see that the top border of the scapula sits a bit lower than the top border of the clavicle. So that's an important relationship to keep in mind, especially from the side view. So that's looking like a pretty good foundation for our shoulder girdle. Actually, it looks like the lateral ends of that clavicle should be up a bit higher. But you know what? We can fix that later. So for now, let's just move on. Alright, so we got our body set up for success. And now there's only one other thing that I want to show you before we wrap this lesson up. This is something that I'm not going to be marking you on right now because it's something that we're going to cover in a lot greater detail later on in the course. But it just looks a little weird if you don't include it. I'm talking about the head, people! And head construction is probably something that you're going to be doing a lot of in your other classes, so why not practice it with some clay? You know, and it takes all of like 30 seconds to make this, so why not? Let's check it out. Alright, heads up, here we go. This is very simple. We're just going to start with an egg shape and another cylindrical piece. You're going to flatten the cylinder between your fingers and then wrap it around the front of your egg shape. You can use a caliper, again, to check the height. Also, people, remember to clean your calipers every once in a while, alright? Don't be Captain Krusty Caliper, because people are going to start saying, Hey, there goes crusty calipers again. Hey, did you clean your calipers today? No, it's because you're crusty. You're crusty. Crusty caliper. Don't be that person. Okay, so our head length is good, but this is looking a little bit flimsy, so we're gonna have to fill in behind and make the job. So just pack it in there nice and firmly. Then make sure to round off those edges so you don't end up with flat face syndrome. Okay, the front of the face has some roundness to it. It's not flat. Do not make it flat. Don't make it flat. Round. And of course, it's always a good time to mark out your midline and your center line. Help you get a sense of the orientation. Now to attach this sucker to the body. You're gonna need a longer roll of clay for this, longer than the neck should be. The reason why is because you're gonna compress it into the head and then compress it onto the body. Okay? This is gonna help make sure that you have a stronger attachment. Then you want to push and blend the sides of the neck into the shape that's going to be receiving it. Bam! There you go, guys. It's not much, but we've sculpted something. Oh, this is exciting. This is going to be the springboard for so many of your sculpting adventures. So get out there and grow to love these beautiful bony body structures.